The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong, like even the walls were holding their breath. The hallway light flickered, my shoes still on, my heart beating too slow for what I already sensed before I understood it. I remember the smell of cold air through an open window, the clock ticking too loudly, and the way my hands went numb before my thoughts caught up. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt that sudden drop in your chest when something doesn't add up, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Moments like this are more common than people admit. I stood there, frozen, staring at something ordinary that suddenly felt incriminating, my body reacting before my mind allowed the truth in. There was no shouting, no tears yet, just a quiet knowing settling into my bones. I didn't confront anything. I didn't ask questions. I just breathed and watched my life split cleanly in two. That was the moment everything began to unravel. It was raining hard when I pulled into the garage, the kind of rain that presses the city into silence and makes everything feel heavier. I remember gripping the steering wheel longer than necessary, my chest tight for reasons I could not name. My name is Claire Morgan, and I was 36 years old, used to pressure, used to solving problems, used to holding things together. As I stepped out of the car, one small detail stopped me cold. A car I did not expect was parked where it should never have been. It was nothing dramatic, just wrong. And that wrongness settled into my body before my mind could argue with it. My skin prickled, my stomach dropped. Still, I told myself there had to be an explanation. The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor passing was too loud, too slow. Inside the apartment, the air smelled different, sweeter, unfamiliar, layered over the scent I knew so well. I stood there listening, my heartbeat suddenly the loudest thing in the room. I did not move forward right away. I did not need to. Something in me had already shifted. I was calm in a way that scared me, not numb, not hysterical, just clear. In that quiet moment, I understood something final. My marriage was already over then. I was the dependable one long before anything fell apart. I built my life around being steady, capable, and useful. I worked full-time in a demanding role, managed deadlines, solved problems, and came home ready to do it all again in a different way, in our marriage. I handled the bills, the planning, the remembering. I kept track of birthdays, appointments, groceries, and moods. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. I believed love meant showing up quietly and consistently. When my husband felt uncertain about his career, I reassured him. When money felt tight, I adjusted. When I was exhausted, I told myself it was temporary. Sacrifice became routine, and routine slowly became invisible. I did not notice when my needs stopped being part of the conversation, because I had trained myself not to ask. From the outside, our life looked stable. Inside, I was often lonely in ways that did not have names. I learned to rest in short moments, to swallow disappointment, to keep moving forward without complaint. I trusted easily, because I thought trust was proof of love. Looking back, I can see how slowly my boundaries thinned. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just small concessions that added up over time. By the time something finally felt wrong, I had already given more than I realized, and that was why the moment of discovery shook me so deeply. That imbalance explains why what I sensed that night did not feel like a surprise, but like confirmation of something I had ignored for years quietly. I moved through the apartment quietly, every sound suddenly sharp. The lights were dim, but not off, and that alone felt wrong. The air held a sweetness I did not recognize. Layered over the familiar scent of home, my body reacted before my thoughts did. My hands went cold, my breathing slowed, as if I were bracing for impact. I paused in the hallway, listening. There was a rhythm that did not belong to the television or music. It was human, intimate, careless. I did not step fully into the room. I did not need to. What I saw in that narrow slice of light was enough to erase doubt forever. For a moment, my vision blurred and heat rushed through my chest. Then everything went still. A calm settled over me that felt unnatural, almost mechanical. I noticed details I would remember later. the sheets I had changed before leaving, the way the room no longer felt like mine. The betrayal was no longer an idea. It was physical and undeniable. I did not cry. I did not speak. I stood there long enough to accept what was in front of me. Then I reached for my phone. My hands shook, but my mind was clear. I recorded what I needed, not out of anger, but out of certainty. I felt myself detach from emotion, as if my heart had stepped back to watch my life without interruption in quiet, controlled disbelief. When I stepped back into the hallway, I understood something important. Exploding would change nothing. Silence, control, and distance were the only things that belonged to me now. That was the moment I chose strategy over chaos. I do not remember every detail of leaving the apartment. I remember my body shaking and my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. I remember knowing, with complete certainty, that if I stayed alone, I would unravel in ways I could not take back. So I did the opposite of what instinct wanted. I did not confront. I did not call. I left. I drove without music, barely noticing the streets, focused only on getting somewhere safe. The world felt unreal, like I was watching myself from far away. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt hollow. I kept reminding myself to breathe, to stay present, to keep moving forward. I went to someone who knew me well enough to see past the shock. Being there felt like exhaling for the first time all night. I did not collapse or scream. I simply let the truth exist in the open, without embellishment. The calm guidance I received stayed with me, the reminder that reacting emotionally would only cost me more. That clarity, not chaos, was the real power in moments like this. I rested, not deeply, but enough to quiet my thoughts. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would stay composed. I would not rush. I would move carefully and deliberately. When I returned home, I would do so with my eyes open and my emotions guarded, ready to observe before I acted. I returned home later that night with a calm I did not recognize. I let my suitcase roll loudly across the floor, flipped on lights, moved through familiar rooms as if nothing had changed. On the surface, I performed the same routines I always had. Inside, I felt detached, like an observer studying a scene I no longer belonged to. I watched everything. The way he smiled too quickly, the way his body stayed tense even in rest, the unfamiliar scent that clung to the air and to him, faint but unmistakable. I noted small inconsistencies, things I would have once dismissed, clean sheets that were not the ones I remembered, surfaces wiped too carefully, effort that came too late. I played my part with precision. I moved through dinner, conversation, and sleep as if on autopilot. Emotional distance made everything sharper. Guilt has a texture, and that night I learned how clearly it shows itself to someone who is no longer willing to look away. When the apartment finally went quiet, I did not sleep. I lay still, listening, waiting for breathing to deepen, for the night to settle. Then I moved, slowly, carefully. I opened what I had never felt the need to question before: a phone, an account, folders hidden behind harmless names. What I found shifted something fundamental. The betrayal was not limited to bodies or secrets. There were patterns of money moved without discussion, decisions made without me, a life quietly divided in ways I had never agreed to. Screenshots replaced tears, evidence replaced hope. By the time the sky began to lighten, my emotions had narrowed into focus. This was not about fixing anything. The marriage was already over. What mattered now was understanding the full shape of the truth before I acted deliberately. I stopped asking myself why and started asking what. That shift changed everything. Pain became information, and information could be handled. I decided I would not confront anything until I understood everything. I began documenting quietly, dates, patterns, inconsistencies that no longer felt abstract once written down. I sent copies to myself, stored them where they could not disappear. Each step was calm, almost boring. And that was the point. Drama clouds judgment. Structure sharpens it. I reached out for professional help. Not for comfort, but for clarity. The process was simple and unemotional. Someone else observed what I no longer wanted to witness alone. Photos, timelines, routines repeated so often they lost all illusion of coincidence. Cafes during workdays, short motel visits, money moving in small, regular amounts that added up quickly. Watching the patterns unfold was strangely grounding. There was no spike of anger, no rush of grief, just confirmation. Love does not hide. Love does not require secrecy, codes, or erasure. What I was seeing was not passion or confusion, it was convenience. With every detail documented, emotional distance settled in completely. I was no longer reacting, I was preparing. The relationship I thought I had was already empty, maintained by habit and my silence. Knowing that gave me steadiness, and it made the next step clear. If lies were this easy to live with, they would be just as easy to expose through quiet testing, and this time I intended to watch carefully, patiently, without mercy or hesitation, until the truth finished revealing itself completely fully. I tested the truth quietly, the way you test ice before stepping onto it. I brought up small, harmless topics, nothing that should have caused tension. I watched how his body reacted before his words ever did. A pause where there should have been ease, a breath held too long, eyes that flicked away for just a second. Fear has a rhythm, and once you learn it, it becomes obvious. I felt no anger listening to it, only confirmation. I noticed how quickly explanations arrived, overly detailed, as if rehearsed. How certainty collapsed the moment I added a single unexpected detail. The lies were not dramatic. They were familiar, practiced, shaped by repetition. That was the most revealing part. This was not confusion or impulse. It was maintenance. Inside, I stayed steady. I did not push. I did not challenge. I let silence do the work. Each hesitation filled the space with more truth than confrontation ever could. It amazed me how fragile dishonesty becomes when it is no longer protected by trust. By the end of those small tests, I felt settled. There was nothing left to wonder about. I knew exactly who I was dealing with and what he was capable of hiding. The certainty brought relief, not pain. It meant I could stop guessing. Soon others would. The family gathering felt warm on the surface, the kind of familiar noise and movement that usually brings comfort. Laughter filled the house, food crowded the table, and everyone played their roles effortlessly. I did too. I smiled, hugged, listened, and moved through the room as if nothing inside me was fractured. I watched more than I spoke. My parents moved with the quiet rhythm of people who had built a life together. My brother looked tired but hopeful, still believing in plans and promises. His wife arrived a little later than expected, polished and composed, carrying herself carefully. The tension around her was subtle, but I felt it immediately. It was a small detail that caught my attention. A piece of jewelry that did not fit the story I had been told. Simple, elegant, unmistakably expensive. I recognized it without needing to ask. I had seen the charge. I had seen the transfer. It rested against her skin like a secret no one else in the room could hear. Something sharp moved through me, hot and contained. That money was not his alone. It was shared, earned, and trusted. Seeing it displayed so casually made the betrayal feel public. Even though no one else knew what they were looking at, I kept my composure. I passed plates. I refilled drinks. I let conversations wash over me while my resolve hardened quietly. This was not the place for truth yet, but it was the place where I understood how wide the damage had spread. As the afternoon went on, I sensed a shift building beneath the normalcy. The room felt too full, too balanced, as if it were holding its breath. I knew something was coming that would break this fragile performance completely. The moment came without warning. 1 second, the room was full of overlapping conversations. The next, it fell into a stunned stillness as an announcement was shared that stopped everything mid-breath. Joy rushed in instantly. Smiles, tears, hands reaching. Voices rising together. The family wrapped itself around the news like it was a blessing meant to fix everything. I stood there smiling with them, feeling none of it land the way it should. My mind moved faster than my heart. I calculated weeks, dates, absences, nights that no longer lined up. Celebration washed over the room while clarity settled over me. I watched panic surface where joy should have lived. A hand tightened too quickly. Color drained from a face that was trying to look proud. Fear does not hide well when it arrives unexpectedly. I felt it ripple beside me. Sharp and immediate, I stayed composed. I offered congratulations. I leaned into the moment just enough to appear present, while quietly noting every fracture spreading through the illusion. Timing mattered. It always does. The truth does not rush, but it never misses its moment. The drive home was silent, heavy with thoughts no one else could hear. Streetlights passed like markers counting down something inevitable. I understood then that this announcement had shifted everything. What had been hidden was now bound by time, and time does not negotiate. That was when I knew the collapse would not need force. Fear would do the work on its own. And all I had to do was wait and guide it carefully toward the light. I felt strangely calm knowing the ending had already chosen itself. And that silence, patience, and timing would carry the truth forward without me ever needing to raise my voice or break my composure again, ever. I realized fear was more useful than anger. Anger demands reaction. Fear makes people unravel on their own. Once the announcement landed, I did very little on the surface. I let silence linger. I let uncertainty breathe. I shared just enough concern to sound harmless, never accusing, never pressing. A worried observation here, a gentle comment there, all framed as care. I did not need answers. I needed them to imagine consequences. Fear filled the gaps I left open. I watched confidence erode quickly. Phones checked too often, sleep shortened, plans canceled without explanation. What had once felt bold and secretive became cautious and frantic. Fear stripped away coordination and replaced it with self-preservation. I stayed calm and predictable. That steadiness became a mirror they could not escape. Every small shift in their behavior confirmed what fear was doing behind closed doors. Trust between them weakened, replaced by suspicion and quiet resentment. It became clear that fear does not just expose truth, it rearranges loyalty. When people feel safe, they protect each other. When they feel threatened, they protect themselves. I did not push. I waited. By the end of that week, the alliance I had observed so carefully was already cracking. Fear had done exactly what I needed. It loosened control, sharpened mistakes, and set the stage for a collapse that would soon move into public consequence openly. I arrived just as everything was unraveling. Rain streaked the pavement outside, blurring the lights and turning the night heavy and close. Inside, tension filled the space like pressure before a storm. I did not rush in. I stood still and watched fear finally collide with truth. The room was chaos without noise, faces flushed, bodies rigid, movements sharp and uncoordinated. What had once been hidden was now exposed, stripped of excuses. I saw panic where confidence used to live. I saw calculation fail under the weight of reality. The betrayers were no longer aligned. They were scrambling, each reacting for themselves. Then there was the damage that mattered most. An innocent person stood frozen. Shock settling in slowly, painfully. The realization carved itself across his face in stages, disbelief giving way to grief. Then anger. It was raw and devastating to witness. I felt the urge to protect him from what he was seeing, even though I knew nothing could soften it. The breaking point came quickly. Emotions surged, bodies moved, restraint slipped. I stepped forward without raising my voice or my hands. Calm was the only thing left that belonged to me. My presence alone shifted the energy. I reminded myself that escalation would only create more wreckage. I guided us out of that space, away from the shouting, away from the mess fear had made. Leaving felt final, like closing a door that would never open again. As we stepped back into the night, the rain felt cleansing. The confrontation was over. Exposure was complete. What remained now were consequences, quiet and unavoidable. waiting to take their place. I understood then that silence had done its work. Nothing else needed to be said or proven. The truth had surfaced on its own terms, and I was ready to let structure, law, and time finish what fear had started, into a future that would no longer require silence. After everything was exposed, I stepped back and let facts speak where emotions once had. Evidence moved through proper channels quietly, without spectacle. Accounts were reviewed, timelines were confirmed. What I had documented did not need my voice to be believed. Professional consequences followed first. The image he had built began to crack under scrutiny. Access was restricted, trust was withdrawn. I did not intervene or warn him. I understood that protecting him would only repeat the same pattern that had kept me silent for years. Financial truths surfaced next. Money I had earned and shared had been redirected without consent. Paperwork I had signed without question came into focus. I corrected what I could, accepted what I could not, and refused to absorb guilt that did not belong to me. Responsibility settled exactly where it should. The separation itself was handled without drama. No shouting, no bargaining. Just documents, signatures, and the clear understanding that there was no future left to negotiate. I did not seek revenge. I did not need to. Consequences arrived through systems designed to handle them. What surprised me most was the absence of satisfaction. What I felt instead was relief. Justice does not require cruelty. It requires boundaries and follow through. When the last form was filed and the last account closed, the conflict ended quietly, leaving space for healing. Life after everything ended became quieter in ways I had forgotten were possible. I moved into a smaller place, one filled with light and mornings that did not feel rushed. I built routines slowly, intentionally, choosing what stayed and what no longer belonged. Family became closer. Support felt steady instead of conditional. I learned how to ask for help without apologizing and how to rest without earning it first. Some days still carried echoes of pain, but they no longer dictated my choices. I noticed change in simple moments, sleeping through the night, cooking for myself without distraction, walking without my shoulders tense. Peace arrived not as joy, but as stability, and that was enough. Honesty reshaped everything. I spoke more carefully, listened more deeply, and protected my time without guilt. Boundaries stopped feeling harsh and started feeling kind. I did not rush healing. I let it unfold at its own pace. What surprised me most was gratitude. Not for what happened, but for what clarity made possible. Life did not become perfect. It became real. And in that reality, I finally felt grounded enough to reflect on what this experience taught me and why it mattered. Going forward, always. What this experience taught me is simple, but it took everything to learn. I learned that love without respect is not love, and silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes calm is the strongest boundary you have. I learned that my worth was never tied to how much I endured or how much I fixed. It lived in my ability to walk away with clarity, not chaos. Boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for how to treat you. I am grateful I did not become bitter. I am grateful I chose truth over noise and let consequences speak instead of anger. What survived was not the marriage, but me. And that mattered more than any apology ever could. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, I want you to know you are not dramatic, weak, or wrong for trusting your instincts. Strength does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it simply stops explaining. Thank you for spending this time with me and holding space for this story. If you have lived through something similar, I would love to hear your experience in the comments. Please like and share if this resonated. And remember this: peace is not passive. It is chosen. You deserve safety, clarity, and a life where your quiet strength is honored by yourself first, then others who truly see you.